bombers going through with flickering flashes from their guns. All I could think of is they're hurting our boys. The German fighter pilots were making kind of buzzsaw runs. And the old gang spirit came up, and all I could think of was I got to try and stop that.
January 1943. The Allies unleash a new kind of air war, round-the-clock bombing, aimed at crippling Germany's ability to fight. It is the RAF by night, raining wholesale destruction on German cities. And the U.S. by day, launching precision attacks against industrial and military targets. For American bomber crews, the strategy proves deadly.
The bombers were very vulnerable in daylight bombing.
Clayton Gross, 6 kills, one of hundreds of green American fighter pilots sent to England to protect the bombers on their dangerous daytime missions.
They were given a target deep in enemy territory, and they had to maintain straight and level course. The enemy fighters were able to pick and choose the areas where they could attack, and bombers' losses were tremendous.
Remember, our job today is support of bombers. We're to take these bombers into the target and bring them home. Our primary mission is getting there and getting them back.
We were the little friends, the bombers were the big friend.
The job pits Allied fighter pilots against the Luftwaffe's best in aerial combat. It guarantees an early death to hundreds of aviators. Jerry Brown, 5+ kills.
The first time we saw enemy fighters and more flak was about the end of October, and we lost 3 or 4 in our group from being bombed by enemy 109. That taught us a good lesson as to what we were going to be up against, because there was only about a half a dozen of them, and they tied up a whole group of fighters.
I think generally, everybody in the group was like me, scared to death, of course, to start with.
Bud Mahurin arrives in England with the 56th Fighter Group to fly the massive P-47 Thunderbolt. The pilots affectionately call their fighter the Jug. Others call it the 7-ton milk bottle.
When we first landed our P-47s at a Royal Air Force base, the RAF pilots came out and said, "You guys better go home with those trucks, you'll never survive." And so it was kind of a terrifying experience.
The critical need for fighter escorts is driven home during one of the first daylight raids deep inside Germany. On October the 14th, 1943, a day 8th Bomber Command will remember as Black Thursday. More than 300 American heavy bombers set a course for the critical ball bearing works at Schweinfurt. Allied fighters, unable to match the long range of the bombers, are forced to turn back before reaching the target. For most of the 900-mile round trip, the bombers are on their own. Walter Beckham, 18 kills.
I think on the Schweinfurt raid, about 60 of our bombers were shot down. 10 people in each bomber, so lo and behold, there's 600 people. Almost nobody ever got back to England.
The slaughter at Schweinfurt is as heartening to the Luftwaffe as it is discouraging to the American crusaders for daylight precision bombing. Johannes Mackie Steinhoff, Luftwaffe, 176 kills.
The Americans stopped bombing for 3 weeks. The American Congress debated on whether or not to stop daylight bombing. The Americans had lost 800 personnel. Our belief was we could stop the bombing and bring an end to the pulverization of German cities.
Despite heavy losses, the Americans decide to continue the daylight bombing campaign. The lives of thousands of bomber crews will depend on the skill and courage of the fighter pilots.
When you see them come home shot up, people that you know are injured and whatnot, then the camaraderie comes in. Then you realize that you're really protecting lives and you got a mission to do, and the best thing to do is to do it the best you can.
I was just lucky that they put me into fighters. I would have been frightened to death of flying bombers. My principal job in World War II was to escort 4-inch bombers, B-17s, mainland Liberators, B-24s. And those poor guys were attacked. About all they could do is play.
When we saw them coming back, it was quite heart-rending.
Douglas Benham, Royal Air Force, 11+ kills.
These flying fortresses were showing signs of very heavy damage, not being able to keep up with their formation, straggling back and losing height. I have sent 2 Spitfires to look after each straggler, while the rest of us would stay with the main force.
Occasionally, bomber crews get the chance to thank their escorts in person.
Just last week, one of my boys, speaking of all the Spitfires, came up to me and said, "Colonel, there's only one thing wrong with the Spitfires." Well, what's that? Well, he said, "They don't fly close enough for me to kiss them."
Drawing on the bitter lessons of Schweinfurt, Allied leaders devise new strategies to protect the bombers. One is the shuttle, with a relief squadron picking up where an earlier one leaves off. So the big friends have different sets of little friends during the round trip. The other is drop tanks, holding additional fuel that allows P-47 Thunderbolts to reach farther into Germany.
And when we start hitting the targets in Germany, that really hurts.
Thunderbolt pilot Francis Gabby Gabreski, 28+ kills.
The P-47 was a good airplane. It was built to give escort. We had a tremendous advantage. The bombers had a tremendous disadvantage, but our advantage turned out to the bombers' advantage because we could shoot down the German airplanes as they were going in to attack the bombers.
We were about the only long-range fighter group that could take the bombers into the targets that they were attacking at that time. There were about 4 or 5 P-47 fighter groups escorting the bombers, both B-17 and B-24s, and they would take them to the limit of their range, and then we would pick the bombers up after them, escort them to the target, and then bring them back, and then P-47s would then pick them up and bring them home.
Another hot rod, Colonel Francis Gabreski from Pennsylvania, joined the fight. In the same outfit was Indiana's Major Walker McGurran.
With greater numbers and increased range, Americans by the dozens become aces during a period of relentless man-to-man combat. Split-second reflexes determine life or death. This is Gabby Gabreski's gun camera film, the day he shoots down 2 Messerschmitts at very close range, barely avoiding collision. Oil and debris from one of the Messerschmitts splatters his plane. On another mission, Gabreski finds the tables turned.
And I was deep in Germany and saw a 109 go underneath me, and my fuel was running a little bit low. I had to get home. I looked at the 109. I let him go. But he didn't let me go, and he started after me. And just at that moment, I heard an explosion. My rudder was shot away, my boot was torn, and my airplane lost speed. I, in turn, rolled the airplane over as steep as I could to get to a cloud level beneath me, trying to get there before the 109 could finish me off. I was frightened. That night, I didn't sleep very well, thinking of what could have happened that didn't happen.
German fighter pilots face a dual menace. Guns from both the fighter escorts and the heavily armed bombers. Fritz Loskeit, Luftwaffe, 68 kills.
Wenn Sie hinter einer Viermotorigen fliegen, da schießen auf einer...
Think about fighting the four-engine bombers. They had 4 machine guns in the tail, 4 machine guns on top, 4 machine guns on both sides. That's 3 times 4 machine guns, 12 machine guns, all firing at one fighter. Then you've got 3 neighboring aircraft, each with a dozen machine guns. That's 36 guns shooting at you. You don't see anything but tracers.
At the beginning of 1944, American strategic air power becomes awesome. A new aircraft is introduced that will change the outcome of the war, the P-51 Mustang.
We got the P-51 Mustang, which had this extraordinary performance and this enormous range. 8.5 hours we used to fly in that plane.
James Goodson, 15 kills. In a P-51, Goodson leads the first escorted mission over Berlin.
It was a remarkable plane, and of course, being right over Berlin, I think Goering said when he saw our red-nosed Mustangs over Berlin, he knew that the air war was lost for Germany because we could escort the bombers.
As American bombers and fighters carry the air war to the heart of Germany, the Luftwaffe sends fully 2/3 of its fighter force to stop them. In the skies over Germany, the stage is set for bloody conflict. Berlin becomes an inferno. Intense bombing shatters the city. While vicious dogfights rage overhead. Many aces will be born in these battles, and many will die. Jack Ilfrey, 8 kills.
We got jumped by what we estimate a 50 to 60 gaggle of German fighters. I had a real good shot at an Me-109, and he burst into flames. Right at that time, somebody screamed on my radio, said, "Jack, look out. Somebody's right under you trying to ram you." And I thought, oh no. And my right wing went across the cockpit of that Me-109, tearing off about 4.5 to 5 feet of it. And it knocked out that gas tank for that engine and threw me into a spin. Now that upsets your constitution.
I looked down and I could see the shadow of my airplane, and there was a great long trail of smoke following me. And so I knew something was wrong. And all of a sudden there was an explosion and fire started to come out through the cowling of the engine. And at the same time, the group leader called and said, "Watch it, boy, you're on fire." And as the last word I heard was fire as I was going over the side, and of course went over the side and bailed out.
Even among pilots lucky enough to make it home, the daily struggle for survival takes its toll.
At the end of a mission, whatever, I was always dead tired. I'd get back home and park the airplane, and I'd feel like lying down on the concrete. It's nervous exhaustion. I'm sure it's tension.
Between missions, a rare chance for young fighter pilots to relieve tension and blow off steam. the Germans, there is no escape.
Hinzu kommt, dass es den
The
Begriff
Americans didn't know what burnt out meant. They flew for a limited period of time, and then they'd return home, whereas our pilots were constantly on duty. A service record of 500 to 600 sorties among those who survived was perfectly normal for us. But the Americans didn't have anything close to that many, not even close.
The winter of 1944 finds Germany reeling under the relentless onslaught of Allied air attacks. Bomber Command presses the advantage, sending armadas of 1,000 bombers and more to crush the German war machine. The Luftwaffe's fighter arm is stretched to the limit, trying to defend the German heartland. Hans-Joachim Jobs, Luftwaffe, 50 kills.
Zu der Zeit lagen keine deutschen Jäger mehr vorne.
At that time in the war, there were no more German fighter aircraft stationed on the Western Front. They had been pulled back to Berlin due to the American daylight bombing raids to protect Berlin against enemy attacks.
German defense increases in ferocity. Losses are heavy on both sides. Daylight raids are harrowing for the 10 men trapped inside a bomber. And the fighter pilots feel deeply for their big friends.
I, as a fighter pilot, seeing those bombers disappear in clouds of black flak kind of upset me, knowing that there was 10 men on each one of those bombers. And here I am, and a fighter, I can evade and get around, and but they couldn't. They had to stay on their course and drop their bombs.
When I saw big bombers go down, I felt terrible because you knew there were 10 men in each one of those, and we watched a lot of them go down.
By the spring of 1944, the Allies achieve air supremacy. Bombers and fighters in ever-increasing numbers roam over Germany, driving the Luftwaffe to the ground.
The Americans would send out as many as 100 or 120 escorts to protect the 4-engine bombers, and we had at most 20 or 30. Very seldom were we equally matched. Usually, they had numerical superiority, and their escort pilots were mainly excellent.
And that's air supremacy, so that there's just no way that those poor bastards could continue to fight. There's just no way. They still had good pilots. They were still producing as many airplanes as they had been, but they were running out of pilots.
Gunther Rau, Luftwaffe, 275 kills.
Der letzte Einsatz mit Feindberührung war eigentlich am 12.
My last mission encountering the enemy was on May 12, 1944. I was engaged with a large American fighter, a Thunderbolt. I was successful in shooting it down. Then I was chased from a height of 8,000 meters. My plane was totally shot up. My thumb was shot off, and I had to get out. This was my last encounter.
General Adolf Galland, Luftwaffe, 104 kills.
Göring so überworfen war über die Einsätze in der
There
Reichsverteidigung.
came a time when Göring was expressing himself about the alleged lack of bravery of German fighter pilots. He cursed the fighter pilots and claimed that they didn't deserve their decorations. So I was very angry. I tore my decoration from my collar and banged it on the table.
By late spring 1944, the Luftwaffe is all but destroyed. The major industrial centers of Germany's heartland lie in ruins.
The worst experience I had was the bombing of my wife's hometown, Magdeburg. I was flying above and knew that my family was down there. Magdeburg was a burning inferno. It was a horrible experience. I saw the destruction of German cities and realized that with this much devastation on the ground, then Germany could never prevail and win the war. I realized that we were fighting only to postpone the end of the war. but a victory was now unthinkable.
Air supremacy is won at heavy cost. 40,000 Allied airmen die in combat over Europe. The big friends and their long-range little friends will continue their furious assault until Hitler's once feared and mighty Third Reich becomes a wasteland.